The moment hung. A quiet wind snuffled along the massive stone rampart at his back. He stared into Manco's mirror lenses, saw the motion of grey cloud across the sky. Like departure. Like loss. Oh, fuck. The familiar chief drew a hard breath. His fists uncurled. His gaze lowered, and Carl lost the view of the moving cloud in the sunglasses, saw himself twinned there instead. The moment, already past, accelerated away. The mesh sensed it, stood down. Bambaren laughed. The sound of it rang forced and uncertain off the jigsaw blocks of stone.
"You're a fool, black man," he said harshly, "just as Navant before you was a fool. You think I need to put out rumors about the Pistacos? You think I need an army of monsters, real or imagined, to maintain order? Men will do that for me. Ordinary men."
He gestured, but it was a slack motion, a turning away toward the huge jigsaw walls. His anger had thinned to something more general and weary.
"Look around you. This was once an earthquake-proof city, built to honor the gods and celebrate life in games and festivals. Then the Spanish came and tore it down for the stone to build churches that fell apart every time there was a minor tremor. They slaughtered so many of my people in the battle to take this place that the ground was carpeted with their corpses, and the condors fed for weeks on the remains. The Spanish put 8 of those same condors on the city coat of arms to celebrate the fact of those rotting corpses. Elsewhere, their soldiers tore nursing infants from the breast and tossed them still living to their attack dogs, or swung them by the heels against rocks to smash their skulls. You do not need me to tell you what was done to the mothers after. These were not demons, and they were not genetically engineered abominations like you. These were men, ordinary men. We, my people, invented the Pistacos to explain the acts of these ordinary men, and we continue to invent the same tales to hide from ourselves the truth that it is ordinary men always who behave like demons when they cannot obtain what they want by other means. I pass no rumors of the Pistaco, black man, because the lie of the Pistaco is already in us all, and it comes to life time and time again on the Altiplano without any encouragement from me."
Carl glanced back toward the 2 enforcers and the Range Rover. They stood at ease again, hands clasped demurely before them at waist height, studiously ignoring him. Or perhaps, it occurred to him, simply trying to stare down Sevgi Ertekin. It was hard to tell at this distance. "So," he said breezily, "those 2 attack dogs back there got much Spanish blood in them?" Bambaren drew a breath through his teeth, but he wasn't going to bite. Not now. The soft, indrawn hiss was the sound of control.
"Is it your intention to spend the afternoon offending me, black man?"
"It's my intention, Tater, to get some straight answers out of you, and speechifying on atrocities past isn't going to cut it."
"You dismiss?"
"I dismiss your carefully cultivated sense of racial outrage. Yeah, that's right. You are a fucking criminal, Manco. You talk like a poet, but your enforcers are a byword for brutality, from Cusco to Copacabana. And the stories they tell about you coming up on the street make me think you probably take a personal interest in training them that way. Not unlike those Spanish dogs of war you feel so dreadfully sensitive about."
"I have to have the respect of my men."
"Yes, as I said. Not unlike dogs. You humans are just so fucking predictable." Beneath the sunglasses, Bambaren's mouth stretched in an ugly sneer.
"What do you know about it, black man? What do you know about human life in the favelas? What do you know about struggle? You grew up in some cotton-wool-wrapped project lawman-rearing community, catered to, cared for, provided with every—"
"British. I'm British, Manco. We didn't have a project lawman."
"It makes no difference. You," the familiar chief's face twitched, "Nevant, all of you, you all had the same treatment. No expense spared, no nurturing, too excessive. You all got born into a place scarcely less protected than the rented wombs you grew in, sucking on the bought and paid for milk and maternal affections of colonized women too poverty-stricken to afford children of their own.
Go fuck yourself, Manco. But it was out of his mouth too quickly to be the studied irritation he'd intended. His voice was too bright and jagged with the unlooked-for memory of Marisol, and Manco smiled as he heard it, Gangster's attuned sense for vulnerability homing in on the shift.
Ah, you thought perhaps she loved you for yourself. What a shock it must have been that day.
Hey, fuck you, all right. Like I said. Now he had the tone, the drawl. We're not here to discuss my family history. But Tata Manco had grown up a knife fighter in the slums of Cusco, and he knew when a blade had gone home. He leaned in and his voice dripped, low and corrosive.
Yes, the little steel debriefing trailer, the men in uniforms, the awful truth. What a shock. The knowledge that somewhere out there, your real mother had sold out her half of you for cash, let herself be harvested of you, and that some other woman, for cash, had taken on her role for 14 years and then, on that day, walked away from you like a prison sentence served. How did that feel? Twist?
And now it came pulsing down on him, the killing fury, the black tidal swell of it in the back of his brain like faint fizzing, like detachment. Harder by far to hold out against than the cold calculations he'd made 2 minutes ago, the certain knowledge of Manco Bambaren's death at the edge of his striking hand. There was no art in this. This was thumbs hooked into the familiar chief's eyes and sunk brain deep, a snapping reflex in the hinge of the jaws, the surf-boom urge to smash and bite.
"If we are ruled by what they have trained into us," said Sutherland, somewhere distant behind the breaking waves of his rage, "then we are no more and no better than the weapon they hoped to make of us. But if we are ruled instead by our limbic wiring, then every bigoted, hate-driven fear they have of us becomes a truth. We must seek another way. We must think our way clear."
Carl flexed a smile and put his rage away, carefully, like a much-loved weapon in its case.
"Let's not worry about my feelings right now," he said.
"Tell me, how are you getting along with your Martian cousins?" He'd intended it to come out of the blue, and from the look on the other man's face, it had. Bambaren blinked at him as if he'd just asked where the long-lost treasure of the Incas was kept.
"What are you talking about?"
Carl shrugged. "I'd have thought it was a simple enough question. Have you had much contact with the Martian chapters recently?" Bambaren spread his hands. His brow creased in irritation.
"No one talks to Mars. You know that."
"You'd talk to each other if there was something in it for you."
"They walked away from that possibility back in 75. In any case, at present it would be pointless. There is no practical way to beat nanorack quarantines."
"Sure there is. Haven't you heard? Just short-circuit the engine on a ship home, climb inside a spare cryocap. You can always eat the previous occupant if you're hungry, and dive-bomb the Pacific Ocean with the survivable modules. Piece of cake. You don't think it's also pretty pointless having a declared war across those quarantines, across interplanetary distance?"
"I wouldn't expect you to understand that."
Carl grinned. "Hate will find a way, huh? That old deuda de sangre magic." The familiar chief studied the ground.
"Did you really come all the way to Cusco to discuss the Afrenta Marciana with me?"
"Not as such, no. But I am interested in anything you and your colleagues might know about a resurgence." Again the flicker of irritation across Manco's face.
"A resurgence of what, black man? We are at war. That's a given, a state of affairs. Until technology gives us a new way to wage that war, the situation will not change."
"Or until you curry enough favour with Colin to get some nanorack leverage." Manco looked pointedly back toward the jeep that had brought Carl to the meeting place.
"Calling is a fact of life," he said somberly. "We all reach an accommodation of one sort or another with the realities, sooner or later."
Yeah, very fucking poetic. Sevgi drove back down the twisting road into Cusco, taking the curves with a deliberate lack of care. Marsalis held onto the rough ride strap above his door. "Well, he has a point." "I didn't say he didn't. I'd just like to know what you got out of him, apart from cheap poetics, that was worth coming all this way for." Marsalis said nothing. She shot him a sideways glance. The jeep drifted a little with her inattention back toward the center of the corkscrew curve on the road, and they met an auto-hauler rig head-on. Sick, sudden jump of adrenaline and sweat through her pores, but slow. She was still a little soggy from the near showdown with Bambaren's men. She dragged the wheel back, they swerved out of the rig's path, bumped a curve. The auto-hauler's collision alert blasted at them as it crawled past, machine irate. People on the pavements stood and looked. The man sitting next to her said nothing still. "Well?" "Well, I think you should keep your eyes on the road." She slammed the heel of her palm into the auto-cruise button, let go of the wheel. The jeep's navigational system lit blue across the dashboard and chimed. "Please state your destination." Fucking Asia Badawi's perfect dulcet tones again. "City center," she snapped. They'd come direct from the airport, had no hotel as yet. She evened her voice, turned across the space between the seats to face him. "Marsalis, in case you hadn't noticed, we came close to a firefight up there. I got your back." "I know that." "Right. Now, I don't mind taking risks, but I want to know why I'm doing it. So you start fucking telling me what's in your mind before it explodes all over us." He nodded, mostly, she thought, to himself. "Bambaren's clean." He said it reluctantly. "I reckon." "But that's not all?" He sighed. "I dunno. Look, I sprang the Martian angle on him, he didn't blink. Or rather, he looked like I was talking in tongues. The war's still on, and I bet everything I made last year that no one up here has seen or heard anything to change that. I don't think he knows anything about our pal Merin's trip home." She heard the raised tone at the end. But he's jumpy. Like you said, we nearly got into it up there. Last time I had to deal with Manco Bambaren, I'd just blown up a truck full of his product and killed one of his thugs, and I was promising to do it again if I didn't get what I wanted. He was about as emotional about it as that wall of stone up there. This time around, all I want to do is ask him some questions, and he nearly gets us all killed for it. It doesn't make any fucking sense." She grunted. She knew what it felt like, the nagging, loose thread itch of something not right. The sort of thing that kept you awake and thinking last thing at night, stole your mind from elsewhere in your caseload during the day, and had you staring a hole in the detail while your coffee went cold. You just wanted to pull on that thread until it unraveled or snapped. "So what do you want to do about it?" she asked. He stared out of the side window. "I think we better talk to Greta Jurgens. She's getting near the sleepy end of the season, and hibernoids generally aren't at their best when that happens. She might let something slip." "That's Arequipa, right?" "Yeah. We could drive it overnight, be there in the morning. And be approximately as fried as Jurgens when we talk to her. No thanks, I'm sleeping in a bed tonight." Marsalis shrugged. "Suit yourself. Just, it takes us off the scope if we go by road. Chances are Manco's going to have someone at the airport checking when we leave, checking where we leave to. And if he sees it's Arequipa, well, it doesn't take a genius to work out what we want there." "You think he'd try to stop us seeing Jurgens by force? You think he'd risk that with accredited call-in reps?" "I dunno. A couple of hours ago I'd have said no. But you were there when the mirror-shade twins got twitchy. What did you think was going to happen?" Long pause. Sevgi recalled the way it had gone, like her reaction to the near collision a couple of minutes ago, the sudden, poor pricking sweat as the familiar bodyguards moved, the surge of adrenal overdrive in her guts and up the insides of her arms. It had taken conscious will to keep her hand away from the butt of her gun, and she'd been afraid. rusty with too long away from the brink and not trusting her judgment, not knowing if she'd be fast enough or just call it wrong. She sighed. Yeah, okay. She sank back into her seat, thudded an irritable elbow into the padding a couple of times. Inshallah, we can get a halfway decent recline out of these things. Then she pitched her voice louder for the jeep. Course correct, long haul Arequipa. Scribbles awoke on the displays. This journey will take until the early hours of tomorrow morning, Asia Badawi told her coolly. Yeah, fucking tell me about it. Chapter 30. The centre of Cuzco was solid with traffic, most of it driven by humans. No cooperation, no overview. The late afternoon air rang with irate horn blasts, and the queues backed up across intersections. Drivers went to the brink in duels to change lanes or inject themselves from filter systems into already established traffic flow. Windows were down to facilitate yelled abuse, but most people just sat rigidly behind the wheel and stared ahead as if they could generate forward motion through sheer willpower. That and continual, frustrated blasts on the horn. Traffic cops stood amid it all with arms raised as if stuck in a swamp, gesturing like manic orchestra conductors and blowing whistles incessantly, to no appreciable effect. Perhaps, Sevgi thought sourly, they just didn't want to be left out of the noise-making process. The Jeep was a carpool standard. Its automated systems, safety indexed down to a patient deference, could not cope. After they'd sat at a particularly fiercely contested intersection for 12 minutes by the dashboard clock, Marsalis shifted in his seat. You want to drive? Sevgi looked out gloomily at the unbroken chain of nose-to-tail metal they were trying to break into. Not really. You mind if I do? The lights changed, and the truck blocking the intersection crept out of the way. The Jeep jerked forward half a metre, then jerked to a halt again as the vehicle behind the truck surged to take up the slack. The opening vanished. Behind them, someone leaned on the horn. Right. It was the matter-of-fact tone that slowed her down. Before she realized what was going on, he'd cracked the passenger door and swung down onto the street. The sound of the horn redoubled. He looked back, toward the car behind them. Marsalis, don't! But he was already gone, striding back toward the car behind them. She twisted in her seat and saw him reach the vehicle, take 2 steps up and over the hood — she heard the clunk as his foot came down each time — and then jump lightly down again beside the driver's side window. The horn blast stopped abruptly. He leaned at the window a moment. She thought he reached in as well, but couldn't be sure. Ah, shit. Checked her gun in its holster, was turning to open her door when he appeared there beside the window. She scrabbled it open. What the fuck are you? Scoot over. What did you just do? Nothing. Scoot over. I'm going to take it on manual. She threw another look back at the vehicle behind them, couldn't see anything through the darkened glass windshield. For a moment she opened her mouth to argue, saw the lights change back to their favour again, and shook her head in weary resignation. Whatever. He took down the automation, engaged the drive, and rolled the Jeep out hard, angling for a narrow gap in the opposing flow. He got the corner of the Jeep in, waved casual thanks to the vehicle he'd cut off, and then levered them into the gap as it opened. They settled into the flow, crept forward a couple of meters and away from the intersection. She looked at his face and saw he was smiling gently. Did you enjoy that? He shrugged. Had a certain operational satisfaction. I thought the point of going by road was to keep a low profile. How's that going to work with you starting fights all the way across town? Ertekin, there was no fight. He looked across and met her eye. Seriously. I just told the guy to please shut up. We were doing our best. And if he hadn't backed down? Well. He thought about it for a moment. You people usually do. It took the best part of another hour to get through to the southern outskirts and pick up the main highway for Arequipa. By then the day was thickening toward dark, and lights were coming on in the buildings on either side of the road, offering little yellowish snapshots into the lives of the people within. Sevgi saw a girl no older than 9 or 10, leaned intently on the edge of an opened truck engine in a workshop, peering down while an old man with a white walrus mustache worked on the innards. A mother seated on a front step, smoking and watching the traffic go by, 3 tiny children clinging about her. A young man in a suit, leaning into a shop doorway and flirting with a girl behind the counter. Each scene slipped by and left her with a frustrated sense of life escaping through her fingers like sand. On the periphery, they pulled into a Buenos Aires beef company and ordered Pampa burgers to go. The franchise stood out in the soft darkness like a grounded UFO, all brightly coloured lights and smoothly plastic modular construction. Sets of car lights docked and pulled away in succession. Sevgi stopped for a moment on her way back to the jeep, bagged food hot through the wrappings against her chest, Cuzco's carpet of lights spread out across the valley. Sense of departure colliding with something else. Something that hurt, like all those passing, yellow-lit moments of life she'd seen. She thought of Murat, of Ethan, of her mother somewhere back in Turkey, who knew the fuck where. Couldn't make sense of any of it. Just the general ache. Supposed to get better at this with age, Sev? Right. Marsalis came up behind her, clapped her on the shoulder. You okay? Fine, she lied. At the jeep, he got into the driver's seat, then powered up the autopilot. Sevgi blinked. Ethan would have kept the wheel until his eyelids were sagging. You don't want to drive any more? No point. Going to be dark out there, and I don't speak the same language as most of the long-haul traffic. He was right. As they pulled away from Cuzco, the auto-haulers began to materialize out of the gloom, routed straight out from corporation depots and warehouses on the city periphery. They seemed to come out of nowhere, like breaching whales beside a rowing boat, no warning, no white wash of headlights from behind, surging up alongside with a sudden dark rush of air, hanging there for moments with high steel sides vibrating and swaying in the faint gleam from their running lights, then pulling ahead and away into the night. The jeep's systems chirruped softly in the dashboard-lit cabin space, talking to each rig, interrogating, adjusting, maybe bidding farewell. You get used to that on Mars? She asked him. The machine thing? He frowned. Got used to it from birth. Just like everybody else. Machine age, you know? I thought on Mars. Yeah, everybody does. It's the reflex image. Machines keeping everyone alive, right? I guess it's got to be a hangover from the early years, before they got the environmental stuff really rolling. I mean, from what I read about it, back in the day, even the scientists thought the terraforming would take centuries. Guess they just never saw what the nanotech was going to do to our timescales. Technology curve accelerates. We all spend our lives playing catch-up. He gestured. So now we're still stuck with the red rocks and airlocks thing. All those images from back before air was breathable. Takes a long time for stereotypes like that to change. People form a picture of something, they don't like to let it go. Ain't that the fucking truth? He paused, looked at her, cracked a smile. Yeah, it is. Plus, of course, Mars is a long way off. Little too far to go and see for yourself, dispel the illusion. It's a lot of empty black to cross just for that. The smile faded out on the last of his words. She saw the way his gaze slipped out of focus as he spoke, heard the distance he was talking about in the shift of his voice, and suddenly a door seemed to have blown open somewhere, letting in the chill of the space between worlds. It was bad, huh? She said quietly. Out there? He shot her a glance. Bad enough. Quiet settled into the cabin, the blue display lit space rocking gently with the motion of the jeep through the darkness. There was this woman, he said at last, in one of the cryocaps. Elena Aguirre, I think she was from Argentina. Soil technician, coming home off tour. She looked sort of like someone I used to know. So anyway, I used to talk to her. Started out as a joke, you know. You say a lot of stuff out loud, just to stay sane. Asking her how her day'd been. Like that. Any interesting soil samples recently? Trouble with the nanobes? And I'd tell her what I'd been doing. Make stupid shit up about meetings with Earth Control and the rescue ship crew. He cleared his throat. See, after a while, when you're on your own out there, You start to make patterns that aren't there. The fact that you're fucked starts to seem like more than an accident. You're asking yourself, why me? Why this fucking statistical impossibility of a malfunction on my watch? You start to think there's some kind of malignant force out there, someone controlling all this shit. He grimaced. That's religion, right? No, that's not religion. Sudden asperity in her voice. It's not? He shrugged. Well, it's the closest I ever came. Got to the point, like I said, I was starting to believe there was something out there trying to take me down. And then it seemed like maybe if that were true, there'd be something else as well. A kind of opposed force, something in there with me, something maybe looking out for me. So I started looking for it. Started looking for signs, patterns, like I said, and it didn't take me long to make one. See, every time I stopped by Elena Aguirre's cryocap, every time I looked in at that face and talked to her, I felt better. Pretty soon feeling better came to seem like feeling protected. And pretty soon after that I decided Elena Aguirre was put on the Felipe Sousa to watch over me. But she was, Sevgi gestured, a person. Just a human being. I didn't say it made any sense, Ertekin. I said it was religion. I thought, she said severely, 13s were supposed to be incapable of religious faith. Ethan certainly had been. She remembered his incurious, stifled yawn incomprehension whenever she tried to talk about it, as if she were some Jesus land fence hopper stood on his doorstep trying to sell him something plastic and pointless. Marsalis stared into the blue glow of the dashboard displays. Yeah, they say we're not wired for it. Something in the frontal cortex, same reason we don't take direction well. But like I said, it got pretty bad out there. You're stuck in the empty dark, looking for intent where there's only incidents, feeling powerless, knowing you'll live or die dependent on factors you can't control, talking to sleeping faces or the stars because it beats talking to yourself. I don't know about the cortical wiring argument. All I can tell you is that for a couple of weeks aboard Felipe Sousa, it felt like I had religion. So what changed? He shrugged again. I looked out the window. More silence. Another auto-hauler droned by, buffeting them with the wind of its passage. The jeep rocked in its wake, adrift on the night. Sousa had vision ports led into the lower cargo deck, Marsalis said slowly. I went there sometimes. Got the engine to crank back the shields. You have to kill the interior lights before you can see anything, and even then. He looked at her, opened his hands. There's nothing out there, he said simply. No meaning, no mindful eye, nothing watching you. Just empty space. And if you travel far enough, a bunch of matter in motion that'll kill you if it can. Once you get your head around that, you're fine. You stop expecting anything better or worse. So that's your general philosophy, is it? No. It's what Elena Aguirre told me. For a moment she blanked. It was like those moments when someone talked to her in Turkish out of the blue and she was still working in English, a failure to process the words she'd heard. I'm sorry? What I said. Elena Aguirre told me to stop believing all that shit and face up to what you can see out the window. Are you laughing at me? She asked him tautly. No, I'm not laughing at you. I'm telling you what happened to me. I stood at that window with the lights off, looking out, and I heard Elena Aguirre come up behind me. She'd followed me down to the cargo deck, and she stood there behind me in the dark, breathing, talking into my ear. That's impossible. Yeah, I know that. Now he did smile, but not at her. He was looking into the light from the dashboard again, eyes blind, washed empty with the electric blue glow. She'd have left tank gel all over the deck, wouldn't she? Not to mention, she would have rung every alarm on the ship climbing out of the tank in the first place. I mean, I don't know how long I stood frozen to the window after she'd gone. You tend to lose track of time out there, and I was pretty scared, but... Stop it. She heard the jagged edge on her tone, felt the urge to shudder creep up her neck like a cold, cupped hand. "Just stop it. Be serious." He frowned into the blue light. "You know, Ertegun, for someone who believes in a supreme architect of the universe and a spiritual afterlife, you're taking this remarkably hard." "Look," thrown down like a challenge, "how could you know it was her? This Elena Aguirre? You'd never even heard her voice." "What's that got to do with it?" There was a quiet simplicity in the question that tilted her. Suddenly, weightlessly, like sex the first time she got to do it properly and came, like her first dead-body crime scene by the tracks off Barnet Avenue. Like watching Nalan's breathing stop for the final time in the hospital bed. She shook her head helplessly. "See, you asked if it got bad," he said softly. "So I'm telling you how bad it got. I went down deep, Sevgi. Deep enough for some very strange shit to happen, genetic wiring to the contrary or not." "But you can't believe—" "That Elena Aguirre was the incarnation of a presence watching over me? Of course not." "Then—" "She was a metaphor." He breathed out, as if letting something go. "But she got out of hand, like metaphors sometimes can. You go that deep, you can lose your grip on these things, let them get free. I guess I'm lucky whatever was waiting for me down there spat me out again. Maybe my genetic wiring gave it indigestion after all." "What are you talking about?" Flat anger. She couldn't keep it out of her voice. "Indigestion? Metaphors? I don't understand anything you're telling me." He glanced across at her, maybe surprised by her tone. "That's okay. I'm probably not explaining it all that well. Sutherland would have done better, but he's had years to nail it all down. Let's just say that out there in transit, I taught myself into something at a subconscious level, and it took an invented subconscious helper to talk me back out. Does that make more sense? Not really. Who's Sutherland? He's a 13. Guy I met on Mars. What the Japanese would call a sensei, I guess. He teaches Tanindo around the upland camps. He used to say humans live their whole lives by metaphor, and the problem for the 13s is that we fit too fucking neatly into the metaphorical box for all those bad things out beyond the campfire in the dark. The box labelled monster. She couldn't argue with that. Memory backed it to the hilt. Faces turned to her full of mute accusation when they knew what Ethan had been. Friends, colleagues, even Murat. Once they knew, they didn't see the Ethan they'd known anymore, just an Ethan-shaped piece of darkness, like the perp sketch that served in virtual for the man who'd murdered Tony Montez. Monsters. Scapegoats. The words dropped off his tongue like cards he was dealing. His voice was suddenly jeering. Angels and demons, heaven and hell, God, morality, law and language. Sutherland's right. It's all metaphor. Scaffolding to handle the areas where base reality won't cut it for you guys, where it's too cold for humans to live without something made up. We codify our hopes and fears and wants, and then build whole societies on the code. And then forget it ever was code, and treat it like fact. Act like the universe gives a shit about it. Go to war over it. String men and women up by the neck for it. Firebomb trains and skyscrapers in the name of it. If you're talking about Dubai again, Dubai, Kabul, Tashkent, and the whole of fucking Jesus land for that matter, it doesn't matter where you look. It's the same fucking game. It's humans. It's... He stopped abruptly, still staring into the blue-lit displays, but this time with a narrowed focus. What is it? I don't know. We're slowing down. She twisted in her seat to look through the rear windows. No sign of an auto hauler they might be blocking, and no jarring red flashes anywhere on the display to signify a hardware problem. Still, the Jeep bled speed. "We've been hacked," Marsalis said grimly. Sevgi peered out of the side windows. No road lighting anywhere, but a miserly crescent moon showed her a bleached, sloping landscape of rock and scrub, mountain wall to the right, and across on the far side of the highway what looked like a steep drop into a ravine. The road curved around the flank of the mountain, and they were down to a single lane each way. The median had shrunk to a metre-wide luminous guidance marker painted on the evercrete for the auto-haulers. No lights or sign of human habitation anywhere. No traffic. "You're sure?" "How sure do you need me to be?" He took the wheel and tried to engage the manual option. The system locked him out with a smug triple chime and pulsing orange nodes in among the blue. The jeep trundled sluggishly on down the gradient. He threw up his hands and kicked the pedals under his feet. "See? Motherfucker." It wasn't clear if he was talking to the machine or to whoever was reeling them in. Sevgi reached for her pistol, freed it from the shoulder holster, and cleared the safety. Marsalis heard the click, fixed on the gun in her hands for a moment. Then he leaned across the dashboard and hit the emergency shutdown stud. The display lit red across and the brakes bit. They still had solid coasting velocity. The jeep's tires yelped at the abuse and locked. They slewed, but not far, jerked to a tooth-snapping halt. Silence, and the blink-click of the hazard lights on automatic. Cherry-red glow pooled at each corner of the jeep, vanished. Pooled, vanished. Pooled, vanished. Right. He fumbled the mechanism of his seat so it sank and allowed him access to the back of the jeep, dived over and hung from the seat back by his hips groping around. His voice tightened up with the pressure on his stomach muscles. "Seen this before in the Zagros. Mostly from the other side of the scam. We used to flag down the Iranian troop carriers like this for ambush. Hook them well before they could see you." A blanket rose and fell in his hand, tossed away. "Once you've cracked the pilot protocols, you can do pretty much what you like with them." Rattle of something plastic spilling. He reached harder. "Crash them into each other, drive them off the edge of a cliff if there is one, or over a carefully placed mine-fuck." "What are you doing?" "Looking for a weapon. I figure you're not going to share that Beretta with me, right? Contractual obligations and all that." He bounced back into the seat, teeth tight in frustration, glared around him and then threw open the door. He ran around to the back of the jeep. Road dust from the emergency stop caught on a soft breeze and blew forward over and around them in a cloud. It floated away, ghostly quiet and intermittently lit up red by the hazard lights. Sevgi looked back and saw Marsalis working to loosen something from the rear hatch. The jeep rocked on its suspension with every tug. The flashing lights lit him amid the dust, turning his face demonic with tension and focused effort. She thought she heard him grunt. Something clanked loose. He came back to the door, hefting a collapsible shovel. "All right, listen," he said, suddenly calm. "If we're lucky, these are local thugs used to flagging down easy-mark trucks and the odd tour bus. If they are, I'm guessing we've got a couple more minutes before they realise what we've done. Maybe another 3 or 4 minutes after that for them to mount up and come find us. Not long, however you look at it. So, textbook response, we need to get out of the vehicle and find some cover. Fast." Sevgi nodded mutely, suddenly aware of how dry her mouth was. She snapped the slide on the Beretta, textbook style, tilting it to the horizontal so she could read the load display on the side. 33 and 1 in the pipe. The Mars Tech guns took state-of-the-art expansion slugs, pencil slim, accurate at long range and explosive on impact. She cleared her throat and lifted the Beretta. "You think we'll be able to chase them off?" He stared at her. The hazards painted him red, dark, red, dark, red, dark. He looked down at the folded shovel in his hands, snapped the blade out into the functional position. Then he looked up at her again, hands tightening the locking mechanism in place, and his voice was almost gentle. "Sevgi, we're going to have to kill these guys." Chapter 31. There were 7 of them. From his limited vantage point, Carl made them for Peruvian regulars and relaxed a little. Familiar hitmen would have been worse. He let the mesh come on, felt it seep into his muscles like rage. His vision sharpened on the lead soldiers. They were walking 3 abreast on the opposite lane, 10 paces ahead of a slow-crawling open army jeep that carried the other 4 and a mounted machine gun. The vehicle moved with the main lights doused. That much at least they were doing right, and the vanguard party held their assault rifles ready for use. A gawky tension in the way they moved screamed conscript nerves. These guys could have been the same easy grin, soccer-talking uniforms he'd blagged a ride from months back on his way to kill Grey. With luck, they'd be as young and unprepared. They came to a halt 20 meters from the red hazard flash pooling and fading at each corner of the stranded Colin jeep. Muttered Spanish, too far off to catch. The curve on the road was gentle. They'd have been able to see the lights for the last 100 meters at least, but they'd chosen now to stop and discuss tactics. Carl smiled to himself and gripped the shaft of the shovel. The eroded metal edge of the blade touched his face, cold and notched with use against his cheek. The jeep backed up a little. The vanguard soldiers crossed the luminous median, looking both ways like well-trained children. Carl thought he could hear the distant drone of an auto-hauler somewhere in the night, impossible to tell how far off or which direction it was headed. Otherwise there was nothing but thin moonlight on porous rock and jagged mountain backdrop. Stars shingled across the sky almost as clear as on Mars. It was quiet enough to hear the scuff of booted feet across the Evercrete now that they were close. The follow-up grumble of the jeep's antique engine. "Fucking 7 of them. Christ, I hope you're up for this, Ertegun." He'd asked her if she knew how to kill someone with a matte grey Beretta, if she'd ever shot anyone dead, half hoping she'd crumble and give him the weapon. The look he got in return was enough, but she hadn't answered his question, and he still didn't know. The vanguard arrived at the Colin vehicle. They crept up, crab-wise, and peered inside the cabin, tugged at the door handles and barked surprise when the doors pulled open on smooth hydraulic servos, poked their weapons nervously inside. Now he could hear them talking, forced bravado rising through the soft coastal Spanish accents like grit through a silk screen. Young boy talk. "You check the back, Ernesto? Already done it, man. They're fucking gone. Run off. Told the Sarge we should have pulled them over old style. Flashing lights, roadblock, it never fails." "That's all you fucking know," a third voice from around the other side of the jeep. It sounded a little older. "This isn't some commie Bolivian strike leader, this is a fucking 13. He would have driven right through us, fucked us in pieces. That gringa cunt, that's what I'll fuck in pieces when we catch up with them." Laughter. "She's not a gringa, Ernesto. Didn't you see the photo? I got a sister-in-law in Barranca, got lighter skin than that. Hey, she's from Nueva York. That's good enough fucking for me. You know something? You guys disgust me. What if your mothers could hear you now?" "Oh, come on, Ramon. Don't be an altar boy your whole fucking life. You seen the photos of this bitch or not? Tits on her like Kame Chachapoyas. Don't tell me you don't want a piece of that." Ramon said nothing. The slightly older one filled in for him. "Tell you what, you do fuck her, either of you. You'd better spray on first. Those gringas got a dose of everything going. I got a cousin in Nueva York says those bitches are out fucking everything that moves. Man, you got fucking family all over, don't you? How come—" An NCO bellow from the jeep. "Report, Corporal." "Nothing here, sir," the older voice called back. "They're gone. Have to quarter the area." In the jeep, something indistinct was said about fucking infrareds. Probably, Carl guessed, that they didn't have any. "Ground search. Oh, for fuck's sake. I'm telling you, when we catch up with his twist and his bitch—" And time. He let the rage drive him, rolled, braced himself off the edge of the moulded roof storage pen, and came down a metre clear on the side opposite the other jeep. The heat-resistant elastic tarpaulin that had hidden him stretched taut as he rolled, let him free, and then snapped back with a flat, slapping sound. It was all the warning they ever had. He hit the Evercrete amid uniformed bodies, sent them staggering and sprawling. No time to count. The one in front had his back turned, did not quite go down. "Fuck, Ramon! What are you doing?" He hadn't understood what was happening, was turning unguarded, no worse than irritated, when Carl swung the shovel blade into his face. Blood splattered, warm and unseen in the dark, but he felt it on his cheek. The man dropped his assault rifle and clutched at his shattered cheekbone, made a wet sound, fell down screaming. Carl was already spinning away, a second uniform struggling on his hands and knees. Ramon, the altar boy? Carl hacked down with a shovel into the soft top of the skull. The man made a noise like a panicked cow and collapsed prone. More blood spritzed, painted his face with its warmth. The third soldier was still on the far side of the Colin jeep. He came around the back of the vehicle at speed, and Carl met him head-on, grinning, black and splattered with the other men's blood. The soldier panicked, yelled, forgot to raise his rifle.
"He's here!"
Carl lunged, jabbed hard with the shovel, blade end into the soldier's throat. The warning shout died to a choked gurgle. Carl zipped up the gap between them, blocked off the late-rising barrel of the assault rifle with one splayed hand, smashed the butt end of the shovel into the man's nose. The fight died. The soldier went down choking. Carl reversed the shovel and hacked down with point of the blade into the throat until the other man stopped making a noise. The night flared apart with headlight beams from the other jeep. Shouts of alarm from the other side. 4 more, he knew. No way to be sure how many were still sitting in their vehicle, how many deployed by now.
"Come on, Ertegun. Pick it up."
Gunfire. The flat, high crack of the Mars Tech gun. 6 rapid shots in succession. The lights doused. Panicked yells from the jeep.
"Fuck. Nice shooting, girl."
"Open fire!"
Carl hit the asphalt, kicked the screaming, rolling victim with a shattered face out of his way, snagged the man's assault rifle. Dimly he registered it as a use-worn Brazilian imbel. Not exactly state-of-the-art, but... From somewhere the mounted machine gun on the army jeep cut loose. The noise ripped the night apart. Stammering thunder from the gun and the shattering clangor as the .50 cal rounds smashed themselves apart on the Colin vehicle's armoured flank.
Mars Tech, we got the Mars Tech.
The idiot rhyme marched through his head, flash image of the kids who used to chant it out back of the bubble fabs at Wells. Carl grinned a tight combat rictus, crabbed about in the cover the jeep gave him, and poked the imbal under the vehicle. He sprayed a liberal burst of return fire through the gap, then cut it off. Confused yelling. The machine gun coughed, suddenly silent. Carl pressed his face flat to the road surface and peered. Nothing. His vision was still blasted from the headlamps. He squeezed both eyes shut, tried again.
"Motherfucking twist, piece of—"
The injured soldier was on him, flailing with fists, face hanging off in flaps where the shovel had sliced it apart. His voice was a high, weeping torrent of abuse, a boy's fury. Carl smacked him under the chin with the butt of the imbal, then again in the region of the wound. The soldier screamed and cringed back. Carl brought the barrel of the assault rifle to bear. Short, stuttering burst. The muzzle flash lit the boy's ruined face, reached out and touched him on the chest like fizzling magic, kicked him away across the road like rags. The machine gun cut loose again, died just as abruptly at yelled orders from the jeep. Still grinning, Carl got to his feet and crept to the wing of the Colin vehicle. He crouched and squinted, squeezed detail from his flash-burned vision, saw the silhouette of the soldier manning the mounted gun. About 40 meters, he reckoned. It hurt to hold on to the detail through aching pupils, but... Better get this done. As if she'd heard him, Ertegun's Mars Tech pistol cracked again across the night, 3 times in rapid succession. The soldier on the mounted gun pivoted his weapon about, chasing the sound. Carl put the embal to his shoulder, popped up over the jeep hood, cuddled the weapon in and squeezed the trigger. Clattering roar at his ear, and the muzzle flash stabbed out again in the cool air. Long burst, drop back into cover, don't stop to see. But he already knew. The mounted machine gun stayed silent. He gave it another minute, just to be safe.
Just to beat that bullshit 13 arrogance, right, Sutherland?
Then poked the weapon up over the hood again, butt first. No returning fire. He moved to the rear of the Colin jeep and eased his head out far enough to see the other vehicle. Silent, tumbled figures in and alongside the open-topped jeep. The mounted gun, stark and skeletal amid the carnage, unmanned and tilting butt first at the sky. Carl stepped out of cover. Paused. Moved slowly forward, mesh hammer ebbing along his nerves now that the fight was done. He covered the distance to the other jeep in a cautious, curving arc. Peripherally, he was aware of Ertekin climbing up onto the road from the ravine side where she'd hidden. He got to the jeep well ahead of her, circled it once, warily, and then stood looking at his handiwork. "Well, that seemed to work," he said, to no one in particular. It looked as if the sergeant had gotten clear of the jeep, was on the way to support his men when he ran into the hail of fire from the imbal. Now he lay flung back against the forward wheel arch like a drunk who'd just tripped on a curb. Above his slumped form, the jeep's driver was still behind the wheel, hands folded neatly in his lap, face ripped away, brains dripping down his shirt front like spilled gravy. The soldier manning the mounted gun hung twisted over the back of the jeep, one foot tangled in something that had prevented the impact of the imbal's rounds from knocking him bodily out of the vehicle. His head was almost touching the evercrete surface of the road, Boy's face slack with shock, staring from frozen upside-down eyes as Carl moved past him. The remaining man lay huddled in the back of the jeep like a child playing hide-and-seek. In the low light, blood shone wet and dark on his battle dress, but his chest still rose and fell. Carl reached in and gripped his shoulder. The soldier's eyes flickered open drowsily. He blinked at Carl for a moment, bemused. Blood-irised spit bubbles moved at the corner of his mouth as his lips parted.
"Uncle Gregorio," he muttered weakly, "what are you doing here?"
Carl just looked at him, and presently the soldier's eyes slid closed again. His head tipped a little to one side, came to rest against the inside trim of the jeep. Carl reached in again and felt for a pulse. He sighed. Ertekin reached his side. "You okay?" he asked her absently.
"Yeah. Marsalis, you've got blood?"
"Not mine. Can I see that Mars Tech piece of yours for a second?"
Sure."
She handed the weapon to him, took the imbal as he offered it over in return. He weighed the Beretta for a moment, checking the safety and the load display. Then he raised it and shot the young soldier through the face. The boy's head jerked back, lolled. He knocked the safety back on, palmed the warmth of the barrel, and handed the pistol back to Ertekin. She didn't take it. Her voice, when it came, was leashed tight with anger.
"What the fuck did you do that for?"
He shrugged. "Because he wasn't dead."
"So you had to make him that way?"
Now the anger started to bleed through. Suddenly she was shouting,
"Look at him, Marsalis! He was no threat! He was injured!"
"Yeah." Carl gestured around at the deserted road and the empty landscape beyond. "You see a hospital out there anywhere?"
"In Arequipa."
"In Arequipa he'd have been a fucking liability." Running a little anger of his own now. "Ertekin, we need to hit Greta Jurgens fast, before she finds out what went down here tonight. We don't have time for hospital visits. This isn't a—" "What?" Ertekin was frowning. Anger shelled momentarily as she reached into her jacket pocket. She fished out her phone, which was vibrating quietly on and off, pulsing along its edges with pale crystalline light. "Oh, you've got to be fucking kidding me." Carl looked away down the perspectives of the road in exasperated disbelief. "At this time of night?"
"Rang before," she said, putting the device to her ear. "Just before the fireworks kicked off. Didn't have time to pick up." "Ertekin?" Then she listened quietly, made monosyllabic agreement a couple of times, hung up and put the phone away again, face gone calm and thoughtful. "Norton," he guessed. "Yeah. Time to go home." He gaped at her. "What?" "That's right." She met his eye, something harder edging the calm. "Rimsek called. They've got a body. We've got to go back." Carl shook his head. Twinges of the firefight backed up in his nerves. Fake fired the mesh. "So they've got a body. Another body. Big fucking deal. You got to pull out now, just when we're getting somewhere?" Ertekin gazed around at the carnage. "You call this getting somewhere?" "They tried to stop us, Sevgi. They tried to kill us." "They tried to kill us in New York as well. You want to go back there? Come to that, Navant tried to kill you in Istanbul. Violence follows you around, Marsalis, just like Merin, just like—" She clamped her lips. Carl looked at her and felt the old weariness seeping in. He cranked up the rind of a smile for cover. "Go ahead, Sevgi. Say it."
Just like Ethan, he gestured. Go on, get it off that gorgeous chest of yours. It's what you're thinking, anyway. You have no fucking right to assume... No? He paused for effect. Oh yeah, I forgot. You get some kind of perverse thrill out of fucking unlucks, and that makes you think you don't see us the same way the rest of the whole fucking human race does. Well, it takes more than a Cuban wank and a few sheet stains to... Abruptly, he was on the ground. He lay there on his back in the road dust, staring up while she stood over him, clutching her right fist in her left hand. "Motherfucker," she said wonderingly. She'd stepped in before she threw the punch, he realized. Right hook or an uppercut, he couldn't work out which. He never saw it coming. You think I haven't been where you are now, Marsalis? He propped himself up on an elbow. What, flat on your back in the road? Shut up! She was trembling visibly. Maybe with come down from the firefight. Maybe not. You think I don't know what it's like? Think again, fuckwit. Try growing up Muslim in the West, while the Middle East catches fire again. Try growing up a woman in a Western Muslim culture, fighting off siege mentality fundamentalism again. Try being one of only 3 Turkish-American patrol women in a New York precinct dominated by male Greek-American detectives. Hey, try sleeping with a 13. You'll get almost as much shit as being one, not least from members of your own fucking family. Yeah, people are stupid, Marsalis. You think I need lessons in that? I don't know what you need, Ertekin. No, that's right. You don't. And listen, you got some fucking problem with what we did back in Istanbul? Then deal with it however you need to, but don't you ever call into question my relationship with Ethan Conrad again, because the next time I swear I will put a fucking bullet in you. Carl rubbed at his jaw, flexed it experimentally left and right. Mind if I get up now? Do what you fucking like. She stood away from him, staring off somewhere beyond the corpses and the arid landscape. He climbed carefully to his feet. Ertekin, just listen to me for a moment. Look around you. Look at this mess. I am looking at it. Right. So it's got to mean something, right? Still, she didn't look at his face. Yeah. What it probably means is that Manco Bambaren's tired of you pushing him around in his own backyard. Oh, come on, Ertekin. You're a cop, for fuck's sake. That's right. I'm a cop. Suddenly, she whipped around on him, fast enough to halfway trip a block reflex. And right now, while I get dragged around the globe watching you fulfill your genetic potential for wholesale slaughter, other cops elsewhere are doing real police work and getting somewhere with it. Norton was right about this. We're wasting our time. We are going back. You're making a mistake. No. She shook her head. Decision taken. I made a mistake in Istanbul. Now I'm going to put it right. Part 4. Out to Sea.
We must at all times guard against any illusory sense of final achievement. To recommend change, as this report does, is not to suggest that the problems we address will disappear or no longer require attention. At most they will disappear from view, and this may very well be a counterproductive outcome, since it cannot fail to encourage a complacency we can ill afford. Jacobson Report, August 2091. Chapter 32.
Greta Jurgens came to work early, shuffling across the deserted white stone courtyards just off the Plaza de Armas before the sun got high enough to make them blaze. Still, she wore heavy-framed sunglasses against the light, and her pace was sluggish enough for summer heat or a woman twice her age. She wasn't small-boned, or even especially pale, given her Germanic ancestry, but the tanned, muscle-freighted bulk of the 2 Samoan bodyguards detailed to escort her from the limousine each day made her seem delicate and ill by comparison. And as she reached the cloistered edge of the courtyard where her office was, stepped under the cloister's stone roof and up to the office door, she shivered, harder than most humans would. October was a knowledge, a cold, creeping tide in her blood. Darker, colder days coming in. Back in Europe, the seasonal cycle her metabolism had originally been calibrated for was already well into autumn and winding slowly down to winter.
And you never could quite get it together to get recalibrated, could you, Greta?
Too little faith in the local service providers. It was a complicated procedure, went very deep. And too little disposable income or time to go back and pay someone she'd trust.
Yeah, and if you're honest, just never the right time either. Too fucking busy, then too fucking depressed, then just too fucking asleep.
It was a pretty standard Hib complaint. Along with more obvious physiological factors, the hibernoid hormonal suite lent itself to mental fluctuations that were almost bipolar in their intensity. All through the waking segment of the cycle, she whirred like an overloaded mag-drive dynamo, working, dealing, broking, living, but always too busy to rest or relax or sleep or worry about minor considerations like changing her life for the better. Then, as the hormonal tide began to ebb and such considerations finally managed to creep to the front of her conscious concerns, they came in freighted with such a surging sense of attendant weariness in the face of insurmountable odds that it was all she could do not to weep at the pointlessness of trying to do anything about a thing like that now.
Better just to sleep on it, better just let it go this time around, pick up again in spring and
around she went again. An unfortunate psychological side effect, went the arid, tut-tutting text of the Jacobson Protocol, and somewhat debilitating for those implicated, but not a failing this committee need concern itself with unduly, nor a social threat as such. Somewhat debilitating. Right. Her fingers mashed at the door code panel, slow and clumsy, as if they weren't really hers. The Samoans stood by. Isaac and Celesi, both of them familiar enforcers since their youth, long-schooled in a sort of hard-faced butler's diplomacy where escort duties were concerned. They knew better than to offer her help. She'd been in a foul mood for days now, snappish and strung out at the wrong end of her waking tether. Judgment fraying, social skills barely operational. Under normal circumstances, she'd already have handed over operations here to one of Manco's brighter minions, given in to the inevitable changes in her blood chemistry and let the cold tide turn opiate warm along her veins. She'd already be housebound, down at the Kolka retreat, pottering about, prepping for the long sleep ahead. Under normal circumstances, she wouldn't have to. He came out of nowhere. She still had her sunglasses on, blurry early morning vision and not much peripheral sense at all this late in the cycle. No surprise she didn't see it happen. Her first warning was the sound of a solid, untidy impact behind her. The door, coded open, was already swinging inward off the latch. She felt the huge hand of one of the bodyguards hit her in the small of her back, shoving her bodily inside. She stumbled, caught the corner of a desk in the cramped office space, struggled foggily to comprehend.
We're being hit. Impossible.
Her mind rejected it, out of hand, objections in a blurry rush. Manco had put his stamp on the Arequipa gangs a decade ago, made his allegiances, wiped out the rest. No one was stupid enough to buck the trend. And the courtyard, the white stone courtyard, was pristine when they crossed, empty this early. The sound behind her played back in her head. Shock jumped in her blood as she put it together. Someone had come off the paved walkway above the cloister, jumped better than 5 meters directly down and onto her escorts, was outside now, finishing the job. Isaac cannoned into the door jamb and sagged there, clinging. Blood matted his hair and poured down his face between the eyes. He made a convulsive effort to gain his feet again, failed, went down in a heap. Behind him in the doorway, a black figure silhouetted against the gathering glare of the early morning sun. Something flopped in her sluggish blood. Deep jolt of instinctive fear just ahead of recognition. "Morning, Greta. Surprised to see me?"
"Marsalis,"
she spat it out, temper snapping across.
"What the fuck do you think you're doing?"
He stepped carefully into the office, skirting Isaac's toppled bulk with cat-like care and wary sideways glance. Behind him, through the open door, she saw Selessi stretched out unmoving on the chessboard, white and grey pavement of the courtyard, like a beached whale. Marsalis didn't have a mark on him, didn't even appear to be breathing heavily. He stood just inside reaching distance and looked impassively at her. "I haven't had much sleep, Greta. I'd bear that in mind if I were you." "I'm not afraid of you." He saw it was true, smiled a little. "I guess not. Welcome to the Twist Brotherhood, right? All just monsters together." "I repeat." She stepped away from the desk corner, straightened up to him. "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" I might ask Munko the same question. See, I've been pretty polite so far. Couple of quick conversations and I'm out of your hair for good. No damage, no disruption, everybody's happy. That's the way I wanted it, anyway. We don't always get what we want, Marsalis. Didn't your mummy ever tell you that? Yeah. She also told me it was rude to interrupt. He reached in, whiplash swift, and her sunglasses were gone, plucked into his hand. Her vision watered and swam. Like I said, Greta, I could have been out of everyone's hair in nothing flat. Instead, last night, while I was on my way here to talk to you, someone paid a bucketful of your illustrious local military to have me disappeared. She blinked hard to clear her vision, silent curse at the tears it squeezed visibly out at the corners of her eyes. What a shame they didn't manage it. Yeah, well, you just can't get the help these days. Point is, Greta, who do you think I should blame? She tipped her head to look past him at the crumpled form by the door. Looks to me like you've already decided that one. You're confusing purpose with necessity. I don't think your islander friends would have been over-keen on us all having a sit-down chat. She met his gaze. I don't seem to be sitting down. For a moment they stared at each other. Then he shrugged and tossed her sunglasses onto the desktop. He nodded at the chair behind the desk. Be my guest. She made her way around the edge of the desk and seated herself. At the door to the little office, Isaac stirred, shook his head muzzily. Marsalis glanced his way, looked back at Greta and pointed a warning finger, then crossed to where the Samoan lay. Isaac snarled and spat blood, glaring up at the black man in disbelieving rage. He braced his arms at his sides and pressed huge hands flat to the floor. You stand up, Marsalis said without passion. I will kill you. The Samoan didn't appear to hear. His arms flexed, his mouth formed a grin. Isaac, he means it. Greta leaned over the desk, put urgency into her tone. He's 13. Unluck. You stay where you are. I'll square this. Marsalis shot her a glance. Generous of you. Fuck you, Marsalis. Some of us got loyalties past getting paid. Sudden, unstoppable, cavernous yawn. Wouldn't expect you to understand that. Am I keeping you up? Fuck off. You want to ask me questions? Ask me. Then get the fuck out. You talked to Munko today? No. He seated himself on the edge of the desk. Yesterday? Before he went to meet you. Not since. Why would he use the army and not familiar talent? You're assuming it was him. He came close to greasing me himself up at Saxo Aman. Yeah, I'm assuming this was him. You got no other enemies? I think we agreed I was asking the questions. She shrugged, waited. Munko got any interests up in Jesus Land? That I know of? No. The Rim? No. He had a cousin did jail time in Florida. Wore a jacket just like this one, apparently. Know anything about that? No. You guys move medical tech at all? She held down another yawn. If it pays? Heard of a guy called Eddie Tanaka? No. Texan. Strictly small time. I said no. What about Jasper Whitlock? No. Tony Montez? No. Alan Merrin? She threw up her hands. Marsalis, what the fuck is this? Gone walkabout? Do I look like Shannon Dukure to you? We're not a fucking missing persons agency. So you don't know Merrin? Never heard of him. What about Ulysses Ward? She sat back in the chair, sighed. No. Munko treat you okay, Greta? She flared again, for real this time.
That's none of your motherfucking business.
Hey, I'm just wondering here, he gestured. I mean, you're good looking and all, but in the end you're a twist, just like me, and—
I am nothing like you, Unluck, she said coldly.
We all know how the familiars feel about twists. I don't imagine Manco's any different from the other taters. Must be tough for you. Greta said nothing. Well? I didn't hear you ask me a question. Didn't you? He grinned mirthlessly. My question, Greta, was how does a gringa hib twist like yourself end up working front office for the familiars?
I don't know, Marsalis. Maybe it's because some of us twists can transcend what it says in our genes and just get on and do the work. Ever think of that?
Greta, you're asleep 4 months out of every 12. That's going to put a serious dent in anyone's productivity. Add to that, you're white, you're a woman, and you're not from here. The familiars aren't known for their progressive attitudes. So I don't see any way this works, unless my sources are right and you're fucking the boss.
Across the room, Isaac's eyes widened with disbelieving fury. She caught his gaze and shook her head, then fixed Marsalis with a stare.
Is that what you'd like to believe?
No, it's what Stefan Navant tells me.
Navant?
Greta sneered.
That shithead? Fucking wannabe Pistaco, too stupid to realize.
She stopped, sat silent.
Fucking end of cycle slippage, she knew dismally. Fucking traitorous genetic bullshit modifim.
Marsalis nodded. Too stupid to realize what?
To realize that he needed us and we didn't need him at all.
That's not what you were going to say.
Oh, so now you're a fucking telepath.
He got off the edge of the desk.
Let's not make this more unpleasant than it's got to be, Greta.
I agree.
In fact, let's stop this shit right now.
The new voice held them both frozen for a pair of seconds. Greta locked onto the figure in the doorway, then looked back just in time to see Marsalis's face slacken into resignation. His lips formed a word, a name, she realized, and realized at the same moment, confusedly but surely, that it was all over. Sevgi Ertekin stepped into the room, Mars Tech Beretta in hand. In the taxi they sat with a frigid 30 centimetres of plastic seat between them and stared from opposite side windows at the passing frontages. Outside the sun was on its way up into a sky of flawless blue, striking the early morning chill out of the air and lighting the white volcanic stonework of the old town almost incandescent. Traffic already clogged the main streets, slowed passage to a jerky crawl.
We're going to miss our fucking flight, she said grimly.
Ertekin, this place has a dozen flights a day to Lima. We've got no problem getting out of here.
No, but we've got a big fucking problem making the Oakland suborbital out of Lima if we miss this flight.
He shrugged. So we wait in Lima, catch a later bounce to Oakland. This guy they've found is dead, right? He's not in a hurry. She swung on him.
What the fuck were you doing back there?
Working a source. What did it look like?
To me? Looked like you were winding up to beat a confession out of her.
I wasn't looking for a confession. I don't think she knows about our little reception committee last night.
Shame you didn't think to find that out before you cut loose on the hired help.
Carl shrugged. They'll live.
The one out in the courtyard may not. I checked him on my way in. At a guess I'd say you fractured his skull.
That's hardly the point.
No, the point is that I told you we were done here. I told you we were going to stay put in the hotel until we were ready to fly out. The point is that you told me you would.
I couldn't sleep. She said something in Turkish under her breath. He wondered whether to tell her the truth, that he had slept, but not for very long. Had stung himself awake with dreams of Elena Aguirre muttering behind him in the gloom of Felipe Sousa's cargo section. Had thought for one icy moment that she stood there beside the bed in the darkened hotel suite, staring down at him glitter-eyed. He'd dressed and gone out, itching to do violence, to do anything that would chase out the remembered powerlessness. Instead, he told her, she knows Merrin.
This is the end of the CD. The program continues on the next CD.